And welcome back, everybody. What I wanted to do today was go over the updated Vassal module I'm putting together. Again, this is just a Vassal module for personal learning and experience in programming in Vassal. There is an actual, well, I believe there will be an actual Vassal module that will be, endorsed by Flying Pig Games and whatnot. So this is just purely for me and to learn how to do different things. So I've put up another video that showed kind of my first run at the Vassal module for Old School Tactical East Front. So I'm just going to show some of the changes I've done as I learn how to tinker around in here, kind of to learn the nuts and bolts. Some of this is more of aesthetic than actual functionality. So I haven't changed the map at all. There was no need for me to change the map. But mostly what I did was I just kind of put some icons up here just to help identify what things are. I could have left them as buttons or the default picture, but it was kind of neat to put like an actual graphic from the game. So for instance, for counters, I put one of the German rifleman counter. Now what I had before was I had a separate spot for German counters and a separate spot for Russian counters. I still like that, especially when I go back to having a dual monitor system. I like to put a lot of informational type windows off on my second monitor, but until I have that, this works. I just pull up one counter spot. They're tabbed off now, so you just kind of, German, and then you got your 3 tabs for German items. Russian, then again 3 tabs. There's infantry, armor. Find what you want, pull it down, the equipment, and then markers. Now that was just a big list for markers. I didn't really see a need to make subheadings for the markers. So that's probably the biggest thing I did there, which I just kind of consolidated it just to make it less cluttered up here with a whole bunch of different things to click on. So all the counters are just located in one spot. I did try to mess around with the idea of kind of separating this first tab of markers. For some reason in Vassal, the very first marker property that you have kind of programs the box into the chat window. So like if I minimize this even more, and then it resizes your chat. And that's kind of why I liked having the counter units for their separate buttons over here, because then I could pull out, say, the Russian counters. It doesn't resize the chat at all, but yet I could still have access to all my counters. This way, with the default in Vassal, it's like just programmed into the side of this chat. And the problem is I tried to move it so it wasn't in that first location, and it kind of broke the module. So what I could do with this first spot is like what I had before, is just have the basic game markers that are rarely used. Well, I won't say rarely, but aren't used as often. Stick them over here in this first spot that I don't have to pull up too often, and then put the other counters in a separate button that would be in a little window that floats that I could move over on the map wherever I want. Because the thing that I don't like about having it built in to like the chat spot is then it takes up a lot of real estate for looking at your map just to go and find a counter and drag it down. But that, like I said, that's more of an aesthetic. Doesn't really hurt the functionality. It's just maybe another way that I'll tweak the module is put just this set of markers here in the first spot, and then put the other game markers in another spot so they're in a separate floaty window so it doesn't take up real estate. Generally in a game though, you're pulling everything from your scenario card, so you shouldn't have to pull down more markers. But if you're doing a custom map or you deleted something by accident, it's nice to be able to just, like I said, just an aesthetic thing. But that's something I did aesthetically, was put a actual counter here for the counter spot. Same thing for the data cards. I have here a data card image. And what I did here was, instead of having the data card sheets on a scroll list, I like tabs. I'm really finding that I like the tabs. It just seems quicker to find what you want. I don't have, just for ease of navigating, it just seems nice to have the tabs right here. I don't know if I explained it before. The only reason I put the tiger here by itself is the tiger because it's more of one of the expansions, like the heavy metal expansion, which I'm not sure what they're actually going to call it, but There's a separate little module that will have like the T3485, the Tiger. So they weren't part of the base game data cards. That's the only reason I have the Tiger over here on its own tab. But generally I would have the German equipment over here. And if I'll probably just leave it on a sheet like this. I don't know if they'll release the final graphics. The Kickstarter said that they would update the print and play module with final graphics, and that's kind of what I got, was the beta print and play stuff. So I might change around the layout of the cards once the final graphics come out. But for now though, there's the German tab, Russian tab, and then the Tiger tab. So that was really all I changed here, was just instead of a scroll menu, I just put tabs, and then the fancy graphics. Same with the player cards, the player aids. I just put them on 2 tabs. Again, it just felt more, can't really describe, just felt better. Had a better feel to it instead of the scroll. Just looks, to me, just looked a little more professional, especially then if I want to put, you know, more aids or more charts. It just felt better to click on tabs instead of worrying about a scroll list. What else we do? I didn't change the cards at all. I didn't touch anything to the basic functionality of the card. So I still got the, oh, I gotta scroll it over. So I still have a card window. You know, you still pour a card over, it shows it random. Right now, because the game is set up as like the 2-player solitaire, I can see the cards. I haven't quite mastered the masking layers. If I had this set up as 1 player, you know, just like a German player or a Russian player, you would be able to see the masking. In fact, if I was playing German or Russian, I wouldn't even be able to access the other player's hand to see the cards that you're not supposed to be able to view them. So I really don't know how the cards will look in a 2-player game. It's kind of hard to run when you got to run this thing in solitaire to test everything. But it is kind of a pain not to see the back here. And I know that's just more of something I'm going to have to learn how to program proper, just so you see the back of the cards here, and then when you pull the card, you know, you get your appropriate randomized card. Just something else for me to learn how to do proper. But then you still have your German hand, so you pull something up, your Russian hand. So I still got my 2 hands, and then if you want to play a card, just put it to the discard pile, play the card. So those are still there, nothing really to change. Then I have the scenario card. Again, nothing changed here, other than I put an icon instead of just a text button, so you actually have a little graphic for your scenarios. Nothing there. Now this is the one that took me a while to figure out how to program. This is the remove status markers. I been digging around in the rule book and then just trying to understand things a little better, of how placing like the markers on units and things to make it make sense in my mind, to help me make a status button. So let me pull down some units and I'll show you what I did. And I got it set up. It works either with infantry and armor. So I'll pull an armor unit down, and we'll even zoom in a little bit, and we'll pull an infantry down. It will just pull the rifle. So here with the 2 units that I have, we'll shrink that up. I've tried to put in some little more right-clicking programming. So like if I right-click it, I can put, you know, if the unit was fired or if it moved, used, exhausted, so I can, you know, say fired. Oh, this was something else I did, again aesthetically. I made the status marker smaller than the overall unit, just because I can then see the status, but then just at a glance I can still tell if that's armor. That just helps me out when I have a lot of markers out and I just kind of glancing over the battlefield. It kind of gives me an idea of where some infantry is located, armor. Again, I like the aesthetics of it, but it's still clearly visible if it fired or moved, and you can still fully interact with the marker. But what I did with the programming, and I should have pulled up the edit module just to show folks that are Vassal knowledgeable how I set this up, because maybe you know something better, but I might do that in another video, because I certainly would like to discuss Vassal module creation and tweaking to share tips and ideas. So for now, though, I'm just going to show you what I made. Another time, if you're curious, we can talk about how I did it, and maybe you can give pointers on how to improve it. But what I did was I put in a clear your status. So when I click it, it'll clear those fired and stuff. And that seems pretty basic for a lot of Vassal modules, but it took me a while to figure out how to do it. It was not easy for me. But once I kind of learned how to do it, I was able to set it so I could put like a shaken status, and shaken, not stirred. And then I could also say that rifle unit is, they fired. So that unit is shaken, they have a fire under them, and then of course you can, collapse the stack, and then if you need to, you can move the whole stack. The other thing too I did was I learned a great little command here in Vassal when you set up the ability to add a marker to a unit. So for example, if I put used, you can tell it, instead of going top of the stack, you can tell it to go to top of that unit, which is awesome. I hadn't really even considered or knew that that was there. I mean, I probably saw it, but just glanced over it. But that allows me to put a couple different units in a stack, and then if I want to add something else to the tiger, I just open the stack, click on the tiger, give him another bogged, for example, click off the stack, and that bog now is attached to the tank. What I was having to do before I learned that was I would add a marker to the top of the stack, and then I would have to just cleverly figure out how to drag that status marker to the vehicle I wanted, or pull off all the units, assign the stack I want. Basically just dissect the stack and then pull everything over one at a time to rebuild the stack. So just that one command saved me a lot of trouble with adding status markers. And again, while these are open, if I hit my clear status, it clears only those things that need to come off every turn. So like if you're used, exhausted, if you fired or moved and you didn't do anything else. But it leaves all of the bogged, immobilized, vehicle damage. It leaves the broken or shaken statuses, because those require rally rolls to clear. So that will help a lot as I go forward with playing the game and showing things. I can just hit the button at the end of the turn, and instead of sitting there watching me delete all those counters one at a time. So let's talk about the vehicle some more. Let's pull that off. Let's delete this. Now the infantry counter was a lot easier to set up than the armor. Armor had some additional things. It can also become bogged down or become immobilized, and those shared a marker. So I just put that in, and again you can flip just that marker to the one that you want, or we'll delete it. Also, they have different damage states that you can put. And again, this was something that took me a little bit of time to figure out, was how to add a submenu. So now if I'm playing and they take damage and they get a machine gun hit, I can now add the associated machine gun damaged shit. And now when I move that stack, he's damaged. And if I clear the status, the damaged gun remains. But if for some reason I decided that that's not what I wanted, I can still delete that marker. But that lets me put, oops, open up for that. Because it's possible, according to the game, that I could have the main gun damaged, the machine gun damaged. I wouldn't be very combat effective at that point, but I could still be mobile and pull that vehicle out of the combat so I don't give my opponent victory points for destroying it. So the vehicle did have a few more things that the infantry didn't have, and so I was able to program those in. And that's most of the automation and new things that I've put in. What I am going to have to do, though, is in the playthrough game, because I took some time to put this together, I actually had to go back and rebuild my scenario card and then open up the saved game I have and replace all of those individual units with these new programmed units, because a saved game doesn't take on the attributes of your new counters. So like if I open up my saved game and these are the units that pulled up that were saved, they wouldn't have any of these automated features, but any new counter that I pulled down from the counter tray would have the new stuff. So I'm actually going to have to rebuild my saved games that you see here with the pre-set up units, and then the saved game I have for my turn 2. I'm going to have to replace those counters with the new counters. which isn't a big deal. It's just another thing that I'll have to spend a day or two to redo, and then I'll start playing again. Let's see, just trying to think. Those are the biggest changes overall to the module that I put in. I'm really just trying to think. Resized. I know there was something I was complaining about before, but I think I got it fixed. I still haven't set a snap to grid. I think I still like the idea of putting these wherever I want within the hex. Just kind of helps to lend to that authentic kind of board game feel. You know, board game, you don't snap to grid. Oop, I want the whole stack. The other thing too that I'm trying to be careful about with the programming in new features and automation is, again, at what point am I removing that authentic game board feel and then just having a computer game? So this still doesn't replicate the AI, and it isn't a computer game because, you know, there's nothing that drives the AI. The AI doesn't actually play itself. You can't hit a button and then your opponent will move everything. You still have to play both sides. But I didn't want to replace entirely that feel of, pulling down counters. So there probably could be more automation I could put into the game, but I think that there's enough here that removes the tedium of having to fill around with all these little counters and markers, especially when you have, like, for example, if I clear these out, delete, and then let's say this guy is used, and this guy, he fired, this guy, his thing, he moved, but he didn't quite get, they only took one impulse each. He took his two impulses. At some point I actually had to, open these up one by one, right click and hit delete. And that's how you have to do it in the board game. But there's a difference when you actually get to put that tactile touch. You're actually putting your hands on the counter pieces and removing all the used stuff. That's tedium in one way, but it doesn't quite feel so tedious because you're actively involved. Here on the computer, it's kind of a pain. I gotta drag the map around, find everybody, right click, hope I remove the right thing, make sure I don't accidentally erase a different status marker. So I really didn't mind programming in the remove status markers button. So to me, that's an acceptable level of automation. The rest of it, we got right clicks for pulling in those most commonly used chits. But then anything else, we can actually just open up the markers and do it the old-fashioned way. Pull it from the marker tray and stick it on the map, and now we can place it wherever we want. And that's another reason I didn't like so much that snap to the center of a grid sometimes, is I do like being able to place something within my hex. That way I can still see what's in the hex. That's another reason I like making these markers a lot smaller, is I'm not covering everything in the hex. I can still at a glance tell what that is. Traditionally, you start getting these big markers and you stick it in a hex, and it just kind of covers up all the artwork. And then you got to kind of shift stuff around or hover and figure out what it is, or use one of the hide pieces commands so you can see the map. But as we start to shrink things down, I mean, obviously I'm not going to shrink the armor down, but all of these stacks of markers just used to be the same size as the vehicle pretty much, and you just ended up with like a big old stack of stuff. So just shrinking stuff down, I think, is acceptable when it comes to playing here on the Vassal, as far as making the game easier to play, but not necessarily taking away all the fun of a board game feel. Probably the only other thing is, let's see, the shaken. Oh yeah, this is what I was going to talk about. I think I was overreading some of the statuses that you put into the game, and I'll tell you what I mean here. And I know Shane Logan, who wrote the game, he said I was kind of maybe not understanding fully concepts. I was making some mistakes, which, this is why we're doing a learning game. I'll cover it here, that way I don't have to repeat it when we actually play the game. But it comes down to the idea of these status markers and stuff. So for example, your unit gets 2 actions, if you will, in a turn, 2 combative actions. Like a fire, you could fire twice. You could fire, then move. You could move, fire, move twice. So you get these 2 aggressive actions. Things like rally, which are not aggressive, you could do those as many times as you want. You just have to spend an impulse point each time you want to do it. So let's say I put a fire marker. So this unit spends an impulse point, he fires. Then let's say later on he moves. So I'm going to flip that marker. Oh, that flipped the whole stack. Never mind. Let's say we flip that one marker, and now he's moved. That's important because when you do some combat modifiers, it asks, did you move? Now, if you fire and then move, you don't suffer any combat modifiers to your firing because you're moving after the fact that you fired. Well, in my mind, I was thinking your move status, you're moving, you're kind of carry over. Vehicles realistically just don't, you don't drive to the store and just stop your vehicle every 2 feet because an impulse of time has changed. You do stop at, logical progressive points like, your stop signs, your red lights, things like that. But in between that, you're constantly moving. Well, a tank kind of does the same thing. If I'm moving a vehicle, for instance, from this hex to this hex, and my ultimate goal is to get to this hex over here, I should be moving him the whole time. Well, in my mind, I think I was overreading the rules, and the rules don't ask you in the instance of like opportunity fire, was the vehicle marked in a move state? Like, it doesn't ask you that. It just simply says, you run through the steps of shooting. I mean, it does say that it's just like shooting. So in my mind, if I had, for instance, this guy here had done his 2 actions, so let's say the last action he did was move. Well, if that's his second action, I'm going to remove that and now put him as used, because that shows he's done his 2 actions. This is how I'm interpreting things. Well, if I then later go do an opportunity fire, this doesn't show me that I was moving. Therefore, how would I know if I should get the moving penalty or not? So as I started to kind of think about it and read into the rules, and I think maybe this is where Shane was going with this, don't add to it. Don't start adding penalties and bonuses that aren't called for. So if I'm doing op fire, sure, it says, look for the die roll modifier. Are you moving? Well, I don't have my unit marked as moving. He's not moving. So you could say, in essence, that even though your vehicle is moving from, say, down here to here, in a tactical environment, they don't necessarily move the 1,000 yards all at once. They do short movements. They're going to move from a little bit of cover to a little bit of cover. They're going to low crawl in some parts, rush in other parts. So there might be moments where they've stopped. So even though they're trying to make it cross country, they might actually be stopping along the way. And same with a vehicle. A vehicle, it's easier for them to go ahead and make that 1,000-yard dash. But depending on what you're doing, what your terrain is, especially like in trees and stuff, you might be moving from a high area to a low area to get a hold down position, or you might veer off course a little bit to go find some shrubbery, stop for a moment, examine your position, and then continue moving. So in a way, in my mind, I could justify the fact that since he's not marked with a move, he's marked with used. That means these guys have taken a position where they're hugging the ground now. They've gotten to a spot and they've kind of dispersed themselves into the best available cover they can find. They're not moving anymore. And now, when you have opportunity fire coming, it's because they're kind of put themselves on an overwatch position. So I don't have to do this moving fire. And same if I had this unit as exhausted, when your unit is used and they do another round of firing, that exhausts them. It's intensive fire. And they suffer a penalty for that. So again, the penalty is built in for the fact that we're not worried if you're moving, there's a penalty built in. Same if this was not intensive fire. Let's say the unit wasn't exhausted. They just had maybe moved, and now they're just sitting here. Well, I guess if they were marked as moved, and that was the only impulse they took, and then they want an opportunity fire, maybe then I could apply the moving fire because they're kind of caught in that perpetual state of movement for the impulse. And then once the end of the impulse ends and I pull all the markers off, well, for the end of the turn, they're not moving anymore. So I think those are the things that Shane was talking about. If he's not marked as moved, even though he may have moved, if he's currently not marked as moved, don't interpret it as being that he's moving. Only interpret him as being moved if he actually has a moved marker. Let's flip that. Because that was a concern I had was, well, should I put 2 markers on here? One for when he fires, one for when he moves. That way I know at some point in the turn he was moving. And I think that defeats the purpose of simplifying the game down. Just look at the last state he was in and how he's marked when you start to add up your combat bonuses. That might make sense to a lot of folks prior to me overthinking it. I think it just took me a while to play it, look at it, and interpret it a little bit differently. So that's how I'm going to play that. But that way I don't have to make a huge stack of status markers for folks. You still only need 1 status marker, and you just worry about the last state that unit was marked when you start doing your combat modifiers. So it might be good not to leave a unit in a moved situation. So if you move a person, spin the impulse to have them dig for cover or get into a different state other than moving. But I think that covers all the thoughts I had about what I'm going to do in my next turn that I play through to kind of change how I track their statuses and how I use that to modify combat. And then that's the changes I've made to the Vassal module. If there is something that you would like to see in the Vassal module, like for me, I would love to learn that when I put smoke down, let's show you smoke. This would be like a really cool thing. When you put smoke down, it's like at a 2, and then as the turn ends, you can decrease smoke. And so it'd be nice if I could put in turn, which would then trigger the clear statuses and flip any smoke on side 2 to a 1, and then if it's a 1, to take it off the board. I've seen that. I can't remember what module they had something like that. It flipped all those for you. But that's definitely something I would need help in learning how to program. But I think that would probably be definitely an advanced feature for the module. But for the most part, I got all the basic stuff in that I think I would need for now. So other than just updating the markers I have for the scenario for when I play again, this is pretty much about as advanced as this module needs to be. So unless you think of something else that you would like to see in here, or would like to discuss how to program or tips on how you program Vassal, go ahead and start a discussion on that. I definitely would like to learn more. I think one of the programmers that comes to mind that does a great job, I see him do some Sun Tzu modules and Vassal modules, Bill Barrett. He's done some incredible stuff. And in fact, that's how I've learned how to do some of this, was I just looked at some of his modules and found some other modules that had features I liked and just looked at how they were programmed. And the thing that I learned is you can do the same thing several different ways. There's no one specific way. Some ways might be more efficient than others, but in Vassal there's definitely more than one way to achieve some of these effects. So what I have might not be the most efficient, but share any tips and tricks you have. If you have any questions I can answer, I will do my best. Other than that, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and watch. Hopefully in a few days we'll continue on with turn 3 with the updated Vassal module. Thank you so much. Thanks for watching again. Bye.